Hip-hop has always run parallel to real street danger, and for some of these artists that danger wasn't just something they rapped about, it was something they actually had to survive with their own bodies. Getting shot at, getting hit multiple times, walking away from situations that should have killed them, that's a part of this culture that goes way past lyrics on a page. These are real moments where a career and a life came down to inches and seconds. Today we're running through some of the most well-known cases of rappers who survived assassination attempts and lived to tell the story, and we're breaking down exactly what happened, how they responded, and how it changed the trajectory of their careers. Let's start with the most famous case in hip-hop, 50 Cent. Back in May of 2000, 50 was sitting in a car outside his grandmother's house in South Jamaica, Queens, when a gunman walked up and opened fire at close range. He got hit 9 separate times, in the hand, the arm, the hip, both legs, his chest, and one bullet went straight through his cheek, hitting his jaw and knocking out a tooth. Doctors said he was lucky the bullets didn't hit an artery or his brain, because at that range, most people don't survive that many hits, let alone walk away with minimal permanent damage. 50 spent weeks in the hospital and months recovering afterward, relearning how to move and even how to rap with a slightly altered voice from the jaw injury. That whole experience became the backbone of his entire persona going forward, the bulletproof image, the resilience, the constant references to being shot up and still standing, all of it came directly from surviving that shooting. He turned trauma into one of the most successful branding stories in music history, eventually parlaying that survival narrative into a debut album that sold over 12 million copies worldwide, and a business empire that stretched far beyond music. Now let's go back further to Tupac Shakur, because before his death in 1996, he actually survived an earlier attempt on his life in November of 1994. Tupac was at Quad Recording Studios in Manhattan when he was ambushed in the lobby by multiple armed men, robbed of jewelry and cash, and shot 5 times, including 2 shots to the head at close range. Somehow none of the bullets hit anything fatal, missing critical areas by what doctors described as pure luck, and Tupac walked out of the hospital just days later against medical advice, showing up to a court appearance the very next morning with bandages still visible. That shooting became one of the most controversial and debated moments in hip-hop history, partly because of the tension it created between Tupac and people he believed were connected to the attack, including suspicions that stretched into the East Coast rap scene. That distrust and paranoia never fully left him, and a lot of people believe it fed directly into the East Coast-West Coast conflict that eventually escalated over the following 2 years and ultimately led to his death in Las Vegas in September of 1996, this time in an attack he didn't survive.
You who killed Tupac, would you tell the police?
Absolutely not. It's not my job. I don't get paid to solve homicides. I don't get paid to tell on people.
If you knew, you wouldn't tell them?
No.
Tupac, would you tell them?
Let's talk about young Thug. Thug has been the target of gun violence more than once throughout his career, including incidents where shots were fired at vehicles he was traveling in during his early rise in Atlanta. He's talked publicly about growing up in the Jonesboro South Projects and Cleveland Avenue area of Atlanta, where violence was a constant, everyday presence long before fame ever entered the picture. Even after becoming one of the most influential and genre-bending voices in modern hip-hop, shaping the sound of an entire generation of artists who came after him, that street exposure never fully disappeared from his life, with heightened security and ongoing legal and safety concerns following him through different points of his career, including during the years-long RICO case that consumed a huge portion of his career. Now T.I. in May of 2006, gunmen opened fire at a recording studio in Cincinnati, Ohio, where T.I. was working on new music with his crew. While T.I. himself wasn't struck by gunfire, his close friend and personal assistant, Philante Johnson, was tragically killed in the attack while trying to protect him, a moment T.I. has said permanently changed how he moved afterward. He's spoken in interviews about the guilt and grief of losing someone so close in an attack that was likely meant for him, and about taking security far more seriously from that point forward, reflecting on how close he'd personally come to being the one who didn't walk away. Let's bring up Rick Ross. Back in January of 2015, Shots were fired at Ross's home in Fayetteville, Georgia, in what appeared to be a targeted drive-by attack, with over a dozen rounds hitting the property. Ross narrowly avoided injury during the incident, and in the aftermath, he significantly increased his personal security and made changes to how he traveled and who he surrounded himself with. He's spoken about that night as a wake-up call, a moment where the reality of his fame and any lingering street tensions collided in a way that could have ended far worse than it did, reinforcing just how exposed even a hugely successful artist can be.
We're following a news alert right now out of Fort Lauderdale. A car going into a building.
Adriana Hopkins is live in Fort Lauderdale with more. Adriana?
We're live here at Southeast 4th Street and 15th Avenue in Fort Lauderdale, as you mentioned. I want to show you again that Rolls Royce that crashed into this building. We're being told by people here on the scene, specifically the manager of the Floridian restaurant, a popular restaurant here in Fort Lauderdale, that a famous rapper was riding in that car when someone opened fire, shooting at that car crashing into that building.
Then there's Cameron. Back in October of 2005, Cameron was driving through Washington, D.C. in his Lamborghini when his vehicle was hit in a drive-by shooting, and he was struck in both arms. What made the story even wilder is that Cameron kept driving himself to the hospital even while injured and bleeding, refusing to stop the car in the middle of the attack. He later said in interviews that he didn't fully cooperate with police in the investigation because of the street code he grew up following, choosing to handle the aftermath his own way rather than through the justice system, a decision that drew criticism at the time but also became part of his tough, unshakable public image afterward. Let's talk about NBA Youngboy. Throughout his career, Youngboy has survived multiple shooting incidents connected to ongoing beefs and street tensions that followed him from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, into his rise to national fame. He's been open in interviews and through his music about living under constant threat, describing a level of danger that never fully faded even as his career exploded into mainstream commercial success, racking up billions of streams while still dealing with real-world safety concerns that most artists at his level never have to think about on a daily basis. One more major name here, Boosie Badazz. Boosie has survived several attempts on his life throughout his career, including being shot at multiple separate times in different cities across different points in his life. He's talked candidly in interviews about the psychological toll of constantly having to watch his surroundings, saying that level of danger became almost normalized for him growing up in and staying connected to Baton Rouge street culture even after achieving national fame, describing it as something he's had to make peace with rather than something he ever expects to fully escape. Let's also touch on Nipsey Hussle, because before the tragic 2019 shooting that ultimately took his life outside his own store in Los Angeles, Nipsey had actually survived earlier violent incidents connected to his years of deep community involvement in the Crenshaw district. He spoke often about the tension between trying to build up his neighborhood through business and ownership while still being exposed to the same street dynamics that had surrounded him his entire life, a tension that unfortunately caught up with him in the end, but one that he navigated and survived multiple times before that final incident. Let's bring up Fabulous. In 2018, Fabulous was involved in a violent altercation outside his New Jersey home that escalated into gunfire, an incident connected to a domestic dispute rather than a street beef, but one that still put him in real physical danger and led to legal consequences afterward. It was a reminder that threats to an artist's safety don't always come from the direction people expect. Then there's Kodak Black. Kodak has survived multiple violent incidents throughout his career, including a 2016 shooting in Florida connected to ongoing tensions in his hometown of Pompano Beach. He's continued to reference the constant presence of danger in his music, describing survival itself as one of the central themes running through his entire catalog. Let's talk about Chief Keef. Coming up out of Chicago's South Side, during one of the most violent periods the city has seen in recent memory, Keef has talked about surviving numerous close calls connected to the same street conflicts that shaped the entire drill music movement he helped pioneer. Several people in his immediate circle didn't survive that same environment.
Now, you lost a lot of friends to violence, huh?
Uh-huh.
Mention some of the names. Let's give them a space right now that you've lost to violence.
My cousin, Bud, my brother, Cap, couple.
Which is part of why so much of his early music carries such a heavy, urgent tone underneath the catchy hooks. One more worth mentioning, Moneybagg Yo. Coming out of Memphis, Moneybagg has spoken about surviving multiple dangerous encounters tied to the same streets that shaped his come-up, describing a level of exposure to violence that started long before his music career and continued even as his profile grew nationally. What ties all of these stories together is something deeper than just violence for shock value. Every one of these artists had to make a choice after surviving, whether to change how they lived, how they moved, who they trusted, and in a lot of cases, the music itself changed too, becoming more reflective, more paranoid, sometimes more defiant in the face of what they'd been through. Surviving an assassination attempt doesn't just leave a physical scar, it reshapes how an artist sees fame, loyalty, and mortality for the rest of their career, and you can hear that shift directly in the tone of the music that comes after. It's also worth pointing out how differently each of these artists responded to their own survival.